Events in Venezuela remind us all that socialism and communism are not about justice. They are not about equality. They are not about lifting up the poor. And they are certainly not about good of the nation. Socialism and communism are about one thing only: power for the ruling class.
It's hard sometimes for those who were born here to truly appreciate the threat that socialism and even communism represents to America. It seems like old history, it seems like far away. Let me tell you a story to illustrate why every American should take it very, very seriously. Imagine a young boy who's living in Central Europe, in the heart of the continent, who survived World War II, the bombing, the destruction, the devastation that 6 years of war wrought on the continent. He lives in beautiful Budapest, where you can see right there the Freedom Bridge, a city in which 3 out of 5 buildings were destroyed, and a city where every bridge over the Danube was detonated and destroyed by the Nazis before their defeat. But that young boy, who was 15 when the war ended, despite the destruction, the totality of the destruction, had hope. He had faith. Why? Because he saw on the newsreel, he heard on the radio, in the newspapers, that the great men, the victors of World War II, had sat down at Yalta, that Churchill had made a deal with Stalin, and that Central Europe, that his country as well, would be allowed to be a democracy, to choose its own government, and to be free again after a Nazi occupation. So at the age of 18, he started college with hope in his heart. But then what happened? As with every country of the region, all the way down from the Baltic to the Balkans, Nazism was replaced with communism. The Reds took over. The Soviet troops never left Hungary, and they started to gobble up that nation and to intimidate, to beat up, and eventually kill any resistance. As a result, this young man, a patriot, decided it's time to resist, it's time to push back, not with a gun or a bomb, but covertly, to spy on the Soviet dictatorship, to collect information of the human rights abuses, and to send them out to some Western government, some free government that could use it against Stalin and the Soviet Union to help free those benighted countries. Along with 7 of his college mates, he created a secret Christian underground student association and squirreled away that information about what the Russians were doing, found a courier who could smuggle it out to the West, and thought, maybe there is hope. Maybe we can be free again. Sadly, that courier did establish contact with the Western government, the British government, and sent those covert reports to MI6, the British equivalent of the CIA. Unfortunately, those reports wended their way eventually to the desk of one of the greatest traitors of the Cold War, a member of the Cambridge Apostles, the 5 Soviet double agents in the British government and intelligence services. That man was Kim Philby. Kim Philby ran, this is his KGB identity card, once he flew the UK and was made a general in the Soviet Union. Kim Philby ran that young group of patriots until he could identify every single one by name. And what did he do? He betrayed them. First to Moscow and the KGB, and then to the Hungarian secret police. That young man, aged 20, was rousted from bed at 2 a.m. with a knock on the door by the secret police, who arrested him, tortured him, and then gave him a life sentence in prison. in a political prison. Why am I telling you this story? Because that man, that young college student, was called Paul Gorka, and he was my father. After 2 years in solitary, after 2 years down a prison coal mine, he was liberated by the freedom fighters of the 1956 Hungarian Revolution. And with the daughter of a fellow prison mate, he escaped to the West. Here's my father and his future wife and my mother, Susan. They made it through the minefield. They ended up as real refugees, not economic refugees, real refugees in a refugee camp. And finally, as a free man and woman in the UK, where I was born. Now, why did that change my life so? There are hundreds and thousands, if not millions, of stories of that ilk, of people who were oppressed. All the captive nations behind the Iron Curtain can tell of similar stories. Well, my life changed on one sunny summer's day when I was a child. And that moment when there was a fork in the road, a bifurcation in my life where I chose one path over the other, is why I understand the threat of socialism to America, and why I have the beliefs that I do, and why I fought every form of fascism, communism, and dictatorship that is alive today that I've come across. My parents vacationed at the beach, and one of those summer excursions saw me sitting on the sand with my toys, blissfully enjoying the weather. When my father came out of the ocean, he'd been a sportsman, and despite being tortured by the secret police, despite the years in that prison coal mine, they never broke him. They never broke his soul, and they never broke his body. And he loved to swim and was athletic, a member of the national crew team before he was arrested. And I saw him come out of the waves, out of the ocean, and I noticed something about him I hadn't seen before. I saw these pale white lines on his wrists, and he was too young to have been wrinkled. So like a naive, churlish little boy, I said, "Hey, Dad, what's that?" Without skipping a beat, with no emotion, he just said, "Son, that's where the secret police bound my wrists together with wire behind my back so they could hang me from the ceiling of the torture chamber." That's when my life changed. That's when I realized that evil isn't something from a grim fairy tale about Hansel and Gretel or a story about dragons and knights. Evil is real, and it lurks in the heart of men. And that communism is a real threat to Judeo-Christian civilization. That's how my life changed. There were others who understood. Of course, we have to mention them here because they were crucial to our defeat in 1989 of that communist threat. One of the greatest was, of course, the American president, Ronald Reagan, who in a seminal speech used the word evil to describe the Soviet Union.
To ignore the facts of history and the aggressive impulses of an evil empire, to simply call the arms race a giant misunderstanding, and thereby remove yourself from the struggle between right and wrong and good and evil.
And less than 2 years before the fall of the Berlin Wall, he stood at the Berlin Wall, at the Brandenburg Gate, and in a speech that the State Department had tried to change 7 times to remove a certain sentence, he reinserted that sentence and called out the evil empire and gave a demand to its then head, Mikhail Gorbachev.
General Secretary Gorbachev, if you seek peace, if you seek prosperity for the Soviet Union and Eastern Europe, if you seek liberalization, come here to this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And a year and a half later, it happened. East Germans, with hand tools, took down the Berlin Wall. But we may have won in Europe, but communism didn't die. It is alive and well right now, not just in China or North Korea or Cuba, but here in America. Whether it's AOC's Green New Deal, whether it's the censorship of Americans who disagree with the Democrat Party, or whether it's the targeting of individuals who wear a red hat and believe that making America great again is a good thing. One woman understood that there is no separation between socialism and communism. I grew up under her, and she was one of the greatest statesmen, stateswomen, leaders of the 20th century. Her name was Margaret Thatcher. And after she left office, she explained the connection between socialism and communism.
We were the first country to attempt and to succeed in rolling back the frontiers of socialism, which is the first cousin to communism. No one else tried it. We were the first to do it. I remember some politicians saying, "We're watching you very carefully, Mrs. Thatcher, to see if you succeed."
And she was right. Now it's here. We may have defeated the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact may have collapsed, but it's on Capitol Hill. It's proud social democrats like AOC. It is Bernie Sanders. It is the radicalized Democrat Party that is trying to create that evil here in the greatest nation on God's earth.
You just watched Newsmax TV, America's fastest growing cable news channel, now in more than 70 million homes. You can get Newsmax TV on your cable system or check your cable guide. And if your system doesn't carry Newsmax, call them, tell them you want Newsmax TV, because we're real news for real people.